The grand halls of the Virelian Empire were nothing like Captain Elias Carter had ever seen before. Towering structures of crystal and gold reflected the twin suns, making the city shine as if it were made of light itself. The air smelled faintly of unknown flowers, and strange, floating creatures drifted through the sky like living lanterns. Elias, a human diplomat representing Earth, walked carefully beside his delegation. He knew the Virelians were proud and powerful. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems, and they rarely entertained talks with lesser species. But after years of small conflicts between Earth and the Virelians, both sides agreed to peace talks. Elias had been chosen to represent humanity, but he also knew the truth. He was here as a test. The Virelian Emperor, a towering figure in shimmering armor, sat on his throne. His golden eyes studied Elias like one would study an insect. But Elias remained calm. He had faced worse before. "This is a waste of time," one of the Virelian generals muttered. "Humans are weak. They are not worth negotiating with." Elias didn't flinch. He had heard these insults before. Instead, he spoke with confidence. "If humans were weak, we would not have survived in this galaxy for so long. We do not wish for war, but we will not bow either." A murmur spread through the room. The Emperor remained silent, but beside him, a figure stepped forward. Princess Syra. She was different from the others. While most Virelians looked at Elias with cold disapproval, her eyes were filled with curiosity. She had a tall, elegant frame, her deep violet skin reflecting the golden light of the palace. Her long silver hair was braided with delicate ornaments, marking her royal status. But it was her expression that caught Elias's attention. Unlike the others, she was not looking down on him. She was studying him. "You are bold, human," Kagzyra said, her voice smooth but firm. "Not many would dare to speak so openly before my father." Elias met her gaze. "Honesty is the foundation of diplomacy, Princess." She smiled slightly, an expression so brief that Elias almost missed it. The Emperor, however, was not amused. He waved his hand, dismissing the meeting for the day. "We will continue talks tomorrow," he said. As the others left, Elias found himself lingering, feeling Syra's gaze on him. For a moment, they stood in silence before she finally spoke. "Walk with me," she said. It was not a request. Elias hesitated, then followed. They'd walked through the palace gardens, where strange glowing plants shifted color in response to their movement. The air was warmer here, filled with a faint hum of energy. "You are different from what I expected," Kyra admitted. "Most humans would beg or boast. You do neither." Elias chuckled. "I have no reason to beg. And boasting is a sign of insecurity." Sarah tilted her head. A warrior's mind in a diplomat's role. Interesting. They continued talking, and Elias was surprised by how easy the conversation flowed. Unlike the rest of her people, Syra did not treat him as an inferior. She asked about Earth, about human culture, and in return, she spoke of her own struggles, of being born into a life of duty, of having no choice in her future. Hours passed, and by the time Elias realized it, the sky above them had darkened into a deep violet hue. A strange understanding had formed between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. "You should go," Syra finally said. "The others will not like that we spoke so freely." Elias nodded, but before he left, he turned to her. "Thank you, Princess, for treating me as more than just a lesser being." She smiled again, a little longer this time. "Perhaps you are not as lesser as they think." As Elias walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission had already changed something, not just for him, but for the fate of both their people. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Elias Carter had always been a man of reason. He believed in diplomacy, logic, and careful decision-making. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. He stood frozen in his quarters on Earth, staring at the holographic projection before him. Princess Xyra's violet-skinned face was calm, but her golden eyes held something unusual: hesitation, uncertainty, maybe even fear. "Elias," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "I have something important to tell you." Elias nodded, still trying to process the fact that she had come all the way to Earth just to see him. Her royal ship had entered Earth's space without warning, bypassing all diplomatic channels. The Terran government had been thrown into chaos, fearing an invasion. But Sarah had sent a single message: "I need to speak to Elias Carter. Immediately." Now here she was, standing in front of him through a communication link. "What's wrong, Zaira?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. "I am carrying your child." Silence filled the room. Elias stared at her, unblinking, as if his brain refused to process what she had just said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He felt like he had been punched in the chest. "What?" he finally managed to say. Zaira lifted her chin slightly, as if preparing for a battle. "You heard me, Elias. I am pregnant with your child." The weight of her words settled over him like a crushing force. It was impossible. Humans and Varelians were completely different species. It shouldn't be biologically possible. You're sure?" he asked, struggling to make sense of it. Zaira gave a slow nod. "I have been examined by my people's greatest healers. There is no doubt. The child growing inside me carries both human and Virelian traits." Elias ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about Zaira. If what she was saying was true, this was history. A human and an alien creating life together. It had never happened before. It could change everything. "How?" he whispered. Sarah folded her arms. "I was hoping you could tell me," she said dryly. "Humans are the unpredictable ones." Despite the shock, Elias let out a breathless chuckle, but his mind was still spinning. A child. His child. With Zaira. And then another thought hit him, a much darker one. "Does your father know?" he asked, his voice low. Zaira's jaw tightened. "Not yet, but he will soon, and when he does," she hesitated, "he will demand that I return to Varelia, and he will not allow this child to be born." A cold feeling spread through Elias's chest. The Virelian emperor was known for his strict rule. To him, a child born of two species might be seen as an abomination, something unnatural. If he saw the pregnancy as a disgrace to the royal bloodline, there was no telling what he might do. "You think he would force you to?" Elias couldn't finish the sentence. Zaira's expression darkened. "My father sees everything in terms of power. If he believes this child is a threat to the Empire's purity, he will not hesitate to eliminate it. And if he finds out you are responsible, you will not be safe either." Elias clenched his fists. He had spent his whole life navigating dangerous political situations, but this was personal. He had never felt this kind of urgency before. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Zaira's eyes softened slightly. "I need your help, Elias. I cannot fight my father alone. I came to Earth because I trust you." Elias took a deep breath, trying to push away his own fears. This was bigger than him. This was about a life that had never existed before, a symbol of something greater than war or politics. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." Before Zaira could respond, a loud beep interrupted them. A warning signal flashed on the screen. Elias's heart dropped as he read the message. Virelian warships detected approaching Earth's atmosphere. Zaira's face turned grim. "It started," she said. "My father knows." Elias didn't waste another second. He turned to the control panel, activating Earth's emergency defense systems. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't just a military standoff. This was a fight for the future of two species, and he would do anything to protect the life growing inside Zaira. Elias Carter stood in the command center, his heart pounding as red warning lights flashed across the screen. The Virelian warships were closing in fast. Zyra, standing beside him, clenched her fists. "He knows," she muttered. Her golden eyes burned with frustration. Elias knew she was right. The Virelian emperor wasn't the type to wait. He was a man of absolute power, and any threat to his rule was dealt with immediately. Now he was coming for Zyra and their unborn child. A transmission request appeared on the screen. Incoming communication from the Virelian Empire. Elias and Sarah exchanged glances. Then he pressed the button. The holographic display flickered, and an imposing figure took shape. Emperor Varix, ruler of the Virelian Empire, sat on his grand throne, his piercing gaze locked onto them. His violet skin was marked with golden patterns, a symbol of his royal bloodline. His eyes, sharp and merciless, focused on Zyra first. "Daughter," he said in a deep, commanding voice, "you have disgraced your lineage." Zyra stood tall, showing no fear. "I have done nothing wrong, father." The emperor's expression darkened. "You carry an abomination within you," he said coldly. "A creature of mixed blood. This cannot be allowed." Elias clenched his fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. Speaking out of anger wouldn't help. He needed to handle this carefully. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Elias said, stepping forward, "this child is not an abomination. It is proof that our species can coexist. It is a symbol of something greater than war and division." The emperor's eyes flickered toward Elias, filled with disgust. "You are nothing more than an earthborn insect. You have no place in this conversation." Elias gritted his teeth. He had dealt with arrogant leaders before, but this was different. This was personal. Zyra raised her chin. "This is my child, father, and I will protect it." The emperor's face twisted with fury. "You will return to Virelia at once. The disgrace you have brought upon our bloodline will be erased." Elias knew what that meant. The emperor would force Zyra to terminate the pregnancy. He would do anything to preserve the purity of his empire. Zyra's expression hardened. "No," she said firmly. The emperor's gaze became icy. "If you do not return willingly, you will be taken by force." The threat hung heavy in the air. Elias exhaled slowly, thinking fast. Earth's defenses were strong, but the Virelians had advanced technology. A war would be devastating. He took a step forward. "Your Majesty, if you attack Earth, it will not end well for either of us," he said carefully. "But we don't have to be enemies. This child," he glanced at Zyra's stomach, "is a bridge between our species. It could unite us instead of divide us." The emperor narrowed his eyes. "You expect me to welcome this insult to my empire?" Elias held his gaze. "I expect you to see the future. This child could be the key to peace between our people. Killing it would only fuel more hatred and war." For the first time, the emperor hesitated, but then his expression turned to stone once more. "Enough. You have 1 day to surrender my daughter. If you refuse, Earth will face the full force of the Virelian Empire." The transmission cut off. The room fell into silence. The weight of the threat pressed down on Elias's shoulders like a crushing force. Zyra let out a slow breath. "He won't wait a full day," she said. "He's already preparing to strike." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we need a plan." Before he could say more, the command center's doors burst open. General Hayes, one of Earth's top military leaders, strode in with a tense expression. "You two have some explaining to do," Hayes said, his voice sharp. "We've got an alien fleet on our doorstep, demanding we hand over a princess, and apparently she's carrying the human's child." Elias sighed. "It's complicated." Hayes crossed his arms. "You think?" Zyra stepped forward. "General, if my father sees Earth as a threat, he will attack. We need to act before that happens." Hayes studied her for a moment, then glanced at Elias. "You trust her?" "With my life," Elias said without hesitation. Hayes exhaled and rubbed his temple. Then I hope you have a damn good plan, Carter, because we just became the center of an intergalactic crisis. Elias looked at Syra, then back at Hayes. We're not surrendering, Elias said firmly. We're going to win. But deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The command center remained tense after the Emperor's ultimatum. Red warning lights flashed on the screens, and Earth's defense systems were on full alert. The Virelian warfleet hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere, waiting for the deadline. Elias Carter stood beside Syra, his mind racing. He had faced life-threatening missions before, but nothing like this. This was no ordinary war. It was personal. General Hayes tapped his fingers on the control panel. Carter, tell me you have a plan, he said. Elias took a deep breath. We can't fight them directly. Their technology is more advanced. Hayes narrowed his eyes. Then what do you suggest? Hand her over. Elias shook his head. Not a chance. He looked at Kyra. But we can outsmart them. Kyra nodded. My father is powerful, but he has one weakness, his pride. He never considers that he could lose. Hayes crossed his arms. So, we use that against him. Elias smirked. Exactly. Kyra stepped forward. My father believes I'm weak because I defied him. He thinks Elias is just a lowly human. If we make him believe he's already won, he'll lower his guard. Hayes exhaled sharply. So, you want to pretend to surrender? Elias nodded. Not just pretend. We need to make it look real. We tell the Emperor that Xera will return to Virelia, but we set a trap. Hayes rubbed his chin. That's risky. Elias smirked. Riskier than sitting here and waiting to be wiped out. Hayes sighed. All right. What do you need? Elias looked at the screen, where the Virelian fleet loomed like silent predators. We need a fast ship, stealth tech, and a way to infiltrate their flagship. Syra turned to Hayes. Do you have cloaking technology? Hayes hesitated, then nodded. The Phantom-class prototype. It's not battle-tested, but it can slip past enemy sensors. Elias grinned. Perfect. We're going aboard my future father-in-law's ship. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You're either the bravest man alive, or the dumbest. Elias shrugged. A little of both. The mission begins. An hour later, Elias and Sarah stood in the hangar bay, suited up in stealth gear. The Phantom was a sleek black ship, barely visible even under the bright lights. Once we're inside, we'll plant a signal disruptor in the flagship's control room, Elias explained. That will disable their fleet's coordination, giving Earth a fighting chance. Xera adjusted her wrist communicator. And I'll send a false surrender signal. My father will lower his defenses, thinking I've given up. Hayes stood at the control panel, arms crossed. You have one shot at this. If you fail, we won't, Elias said. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the hangar doors opened. Outside, the dark void of space stretched endlessly, the massive Virelian fleet blocking the stars. Elias and Sarah boarded the Phantom, strapping into their seats. All right, Elias said, gripping the controls. Let's go make history. The ship vanished into darkness, infiltrating the flagship. The Phantom slipped past the Virelian fleet undetected. Xera guided Elias through the enemy formations, using her knowledge of their patrol patterns. There, she pointed. That's my father's ship, the Imperator. Elias maneuvered closer. The flagship was massive, almost a city in space. Its golden surface gleamed under the distant sun, surrounded by defensive turrets and fighter drones. Xera took a deep breath. We have to move fast. Elias activated the docking sequence, hooking onto their lower hull. Ready? Xera nodded. Let's do this. The ship latched onto the Imperator, and a small airlock connected to a maintenance hatch. Elias grabbed his plasma cutter and sliced through the panel. They slipped inside the lion's den. The corridors of the Imperator were eerily silent. Tall, armored Virelian guards patrolled the hallways, their glowing spears humming with energy. Elias and Sira moved swiftly, avoiding detection. Thyra led him through hidden passageways, her knowledge of the ship proving invaluable. "The control room is just ahead," she whispered. Elias peeked around the corner. 2 guards stood at the entrance. "We need a distraction." Thyra smirked. "Leave it to me." She stepped into the hallway, raising her hands. "Guards, I am Princess Syra. I surrender." The guards hesitated, clearly confused. "Princess." Elias didn't waste the opportunity. He moved like lightning, knocking one guard unconscious with a precise strike. Thyra armed the other with a swift kick, sending his weapon skidding across the floor. Elias dragged the bodies into the shadows. "Nice work." Syra grinned. "You're not bad yourself, human." They entered the control room. The final move. Elias pulled out the signal disruptor and placed it on the central console. "Activating now." Syra accessed the comms system, sending the false surrender signal. The moment she pressed the button, alarms blared across the ship. Elias cursed. "They're onto us." A voice echoed through the speakers. "Syra, my daughter, did you really think I would not anticipate this?" The doors slammed shut. The lights turned red. Elias and Syra exchanged a look. The Emperor was waiting for them. The control room's lights flashed red as the alarm blared across the flagship. The doors slammed shut, trapping Elias and Syra inside. The deep, commanding voice of the Emperor echoed through the ship's speakers. "Syra, my daughter, did you really think I would not anticipate this?" Syra's heart pounded. She gritted her teeth and looked at Elias. "He's been watching us." Elias clenched his fists. "Looks like we walked into a trap." From the control panels, holographic screens flickered to life, displaying the Emperor's imposing figure. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Elias. "Human," he said with disgust. "You have poisoned my daughter's mind. You made her weak." Syra stepped forward. "No, father. You're the one who's blind. The humans are not our enemies." The Emperor's expression darkened. "Enough. I gave you a choice. Return willingly or suffer the consequences. You chose poorly." A deep rumbling shook the ship. The entire fleet outside began shifting into attack formations. Elias swore under his breath. "He's getting ready to fire on Earth." Syra turned to him. "We have to stop him. We can't let this happen." Elias nodded and quickly activated the signal disruptor he had planted moments ago. A small light on the device blinked, sending out pulses of interference across the enemy fleet. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, chaos erupted. The plan takes effect. Across the fleet, warships lost communication with one another. Some veered off course, their systems malfunctioning. The coordinated attack formation broke apart as confusion spread among the Virelian forces. Syra's plan was working. Elias smirked. That should keep them busy for a while. But the Emperor remained unfazed. "You think I rely on my fleet alone?" He sneered. "You underestimate me." The holographic screens flickered, revealing squads of armored Virelian warriors storming toward the control room. Elias tightened his grip on his plasma weapon. "Here we go." The battle in the control room. The doors burst open. Heavily armed soldiers rushed in, their energy weapons aimed directly at Elias and Syra. Syra moved first. With the speed of a trained warrior, she ducked beneath the first blast and struck a guard in the chest, sending him crashing into the control panel. Sparks flew as circuits overloaded. Elias fired his weapon, hitting another guard square in the shoulder. The warrior staggered but didn't go down. More soldiers entered, overwhelming them. "We can't fight them all," Elias shouted. Syra spotted an emergency override panel on the wall. "Cover me." Elias nodded and fired rapidly, forcing the guards to take cover. Syra dashed to the panel, fingers moving fast across the alien controls. The ship trembled violently. The doors behind them slammed shut again, this time locking the enemy soldiers outside. Elias exhaled. That won't hold them for long. Zyra nodded. But it's enough time to end this. She turned to the central console. I'm sending a direct override command to my father's throne room. Elias raised an eyebrow. You can do that. She smirked. I am the princess, remember. Confronting the emperor. The floor beneath them vibrated. The walls shifted, and suddenly they were moving. The entire control room was an elevator, lifting them to the upper levels of the flagship. Elias steadied himself. You didn't tell me we were taking the express route. Zyra's expression was serious. If we can't convince my father, we have to defeat him. The doors opened, revealing the grand throne room. Towering golden pillars lined the walls, and at the center, sitting upon a massive obsidian throne, was Emperor Vale. He was as imposing as ever, clad in ceremonial armor. His piercing eyes glowed with raw power. Around him, elite royal guards stood motionless, awaiting his command. Zyra stepped forward. Father, call off the attack. The humans are not our enemies. Val's gaze hardened. You are no longer my daughter. Elias clenched his fists. Then maybe it's time you listen to someone else. Vale rose from his throne. You human, you dare challenge me. Elias smirked. Yeah, someone has to knock some sense into you. The final stand. Vale raised his hand, and a wave of force sent Elias crashing into a pillar. Kyra gasped and ran to help, but Vale moved like lightning, blocking her path. You disappoint me, Zyra, he said coldly. You betray your own people. Zyra's eyes blazed with defiance. No, I am saving them. She launched forward, striking at her father with a speed only she possessed. Their movements were a blur, father and daughter clashing in a battle of strength and skill. Elias groaned, pushing himself up. His ribs ached, but he wasn't done yet. He reached for his weapon, aiming at the throne. A single, well-placed shot fired. The throne's power core exploded. The shockwave sent Vale stumbling back. Zyra seized the opportunity, delivering a final powerful strike that sent the Emperor crashing to the ground. Silence filled the throne room. Elias limped over, breathing heavily. So, did we win? Zyra looked down at her father. He wasn't dead, but he was defeated. She turned to Elias. It's not over yet. The Emperor coughed, glaring at them. You think this changes anything? Zyra narrowed her eyes. Yes, father, it does. She turned to the control panel near the throne, activating the ship-wide communication system. The message to the fleet. Her voice echoed through every Virelian warship. This is Princess Zyra. The war is over. Stand down. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the enemy ships began powering down their weapons. The battle was ending. Elias let out a breath of relief. That was intense. Zyra smiled, exhausted but victorious. We did it. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The grand throne room was silent except for the distant hum of the flagship systems. Zyra and Elias stood over Emperor Vale, who lay on the floor, his once imposing figure now weakened. The power core of his throne had exploded, disrupting the ship's main controls, and across the fleet, Virelian warships were ceasing fire. Zyra took a deep breath. It's over, father. Stand down. The Emperor chuckled weakly. You think you've won. His golden eyes flickered with something dark, something dangerous. You still don't understand what you are dealing with. Before Zyra or Elias could react, Vale slammed his fist against a hidden panel on the floor. A deep rumbling spread through the ship, and the entire room trembled. Elias steadied himself. What did he just do? Zyra's face paled. He activated the self-destruct sequence. The countdown begins. A computerized voice echoed across the ship. Self-destruct sequence initiated. 10 minutes until detonation. Elias groaned. Of course. He just had to have a failsafe. The Emperor smirked despite his pain. If I cannot win, then no one will. Zara turned to the control panel near the throne. We have to stop it. Her fingers moved quickly over the alien controls, but a red warning flashed across the screen. The core is locked. I can't override it from here. Elias exhaled sharply. Then we need to get out of here. Now. Zara hesitated, looking at her father. He was injured, but not unconscious. Could she really leave him behind? As if sensing her thoughts, Vale sneered. Go, daughter. Flee like a coward. But know this, no matter where you go, you will always be Varelian. Zara's expression hardened. I am more than that. She turned away from him, grabbing Elias's arm. Let's move. A race against time. The corridors of the flagship were in chaos. Alarm lights flashed, and the walls trembled as systems began shutting down. Zara and Elias ran through the halls, dodging panicked Varelian soldiers. Some ignored them, desperate to escape themselves. Others hesitated, unsure whether to stop the princess or not. Elias spotted a docking bay up ahead. There, we need a ship. Zara's mind raced. If we just escape, the fleet will still be in danger. The explosion could wipe out half of them. Elias glanced at her. Then what do you suggest? Zara's eyes locked onto a control terminal beside the docking bay doors. If I can transfer the ship's core energy into the main thrusters, we might be able to push the flagship away from the rest of the fleet before it explodes. Elias hesitated. That sounds incredibly risky. Zara smirked. Got a better idea. Elias sighed. Fine. Let's do it. The final gambit. Zara rushed to the terminal, typing rapidly. I can reroute power, but someone needs to manually disengage the thrusters in the engine room. Elias groaned. Let me guess. That's deep inside the ship. Zara nodded. It's dangerous, but... Elias gave her a look. I'm on it. Just don't blow up without me. She smiled. I'll try. As Elias sprinted toward the engine room, Zara continued working. The ship's thrusters roared to life, and slowly, the flagship began shifting away from the fleet. Elias's mission. Elias reached the engine room. The heat was intense, and warning sirens blared in every direction. He spotted the manual override lever at the far end of the chamber. 5 minutes remaining. Elias dodged falling debris and sprinted forward. Just as he reached the lever, a Varelian soldier stepped in front of him, weapon raised. Stop. The Emperor's will must be done. Elias sighed. Not in the mood for this, buddy. The soldier fired, but Elias rolled to the side. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it hard, knocking the weapon from the soldier's hand. The two grappled, but Elias managed to slam the soldier against a console, knocking him out. Breathing heavily, Elias grabbed the override lever and pulled with all his strength. Escape. Back in the docking bay, Zara watched as the ship's trajectory shifted. Come on, Elias, she whispered. At that moment, Elias's voice crackled through the intercom. Thrusters disengage. Now let's get out of here. Zara activated the nearest shuttle. Within moments, Elias arrived, bruised and breathing hard. He stumbled into the shuttle, and Zara hit the launch button. The small vessel shot out of the docking bay just as the flagship moved farther from the fleet. From space, the remaining Varelian ships watched as the Emperor's flagship drifted away, and then erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave rippled through space, but the rest of the fleet remained unharmed. Elias leaned back in his seat, exhaling. That was way too close. Zara nodded, watching the fading flames in silence. Her father was gone. The war was truly over. But deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of a new journey. The explosion of the Emperor's flagship was still visible in the distance, a silent fireball fading into the vastness of space. The war was over. The battle had been won. But for Elias and Syra, the future was uncertain. Inside their small shuttle, Elias let out a deep breath. That was insane. Syra nodded, her gaze still fixed on the burning wreckage. Her father was gone. The man who had ruled the Varelian Empire with absolute authority, the one who had shaped her entire life, had chosen destruction over surrender. She closed her eyes for a moment. "It's over," she whispered. Elias turned to her. "Yeah, but what happens now?" The fleet's decision. As their shuttle approached the Varelian fleet, an incoming transmission lit up the console. It was Admiral Ralvik, the highest-ranking officer left after the Emperor's death. His stern face appeared on the screen. "Princess Zyra, Captain Elias, what you have done today will be spoken of for generations." Sarah straightened. "Admiral, the war is over. The Empire must change. We can't go back to the way things were." Ralvik studied her for a moment before nodding. "I agree. Without the Emperor, we must decide our own future." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly does that mean for us?" The Admiral hesitated. "Many will see you as a hero, Princess, but others will see you as a traitor. There will be those who seek revenge." Zira clenched her fists. "I don't care about politics. The people need peace." Ralvik nodded again, then returned to Varelia. "Help us rebuild. The Empire needs a leader now more than ever." Zyra's eyes widened. "You want me to rule? Who else?" Ralvik said, "You have proven yourself to be different from your father. The soldiers respect you. The people trust you. You could be the Empress." Elias glanced at her. "Well, that's a big promotion." Zyra was silent. The idea of ruling an empire felt heavy, almost suffocating. After everything, she had wanted freedom, not a throne. A different path. After a long silence, Zyra took a deep breath. "No," she said. Ralvik's brow furrowed. "No." She shook her head. "I don't want to rule. The Varelian people should choose their own path. If we want real peace, we can't have another ruler like my father. We need a council, representatives from every world under the Empire's control. Let them decide." Ralvik considered her words. "A republic? That would be unprecedented." Tahira nodded. "Yes, and it's the only way to stop history from repeating itself." The Admiral sighed. "It won't be easy. There will be opposition." Zyra's voice was firm. "Then I will fight for it." Ralvik stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "Very well, Princess. I will take your message to the High Command. You may have just changed the course of Varelian history." Returning to Earth. With the fleet standing down and peace negotiations beginning, Elias and Syra finally had a chance to think about themselves. As their shuttle left the Varelian fleet behind, heading toward Earth, Elias looked over at her. "So, what now? Are you gonna stay on Varelia and help them?" Zyra was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to him with a small smile. "No, I've had enough of palaces and politics. I want to see the universe on my own terms." Elias chuckled. "So you're telling me the princess wants to live like a free traveler now?" She nodded. "I've seen enough war. I want to learn, explore, maybe even live on Earth for a while." Elias smirked. "You know, I think Earth would love to have you. Though you might get a lot of attention. Alien princess becomes Earth citizen would make headlines." Zyra rolled her eyes but smiled. "As long as they don't make me wear a crown, I'll be fine." A final surprise. As their shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, Syra placed a hand on her stomach. A warmth spread through her, something strange yet familiar. Elias noticed. "You okay?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Elias, I have something to tell you." His expression grew serious. What is it? Tyra's golden eyes met his. I'm carrying your child. Elias froze. Wait. What? She gave him a small, nervous smile. Virelian biology is different. It happens faster than with humans. I only realized it after everything calmed down. Elias's mind raced. You mean, we're going to have a kid? Syra nodded. Yes. For the first time in a long while, Elias was completely speechless. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Well, that's unexpected. She raised an eyebrow. Are you okay with it? Elias let out a breath and leaned back in his seat. Zara, we just survived a war, fought an emperor, and escaped an exploding battleship. Compared to that, I think being a dad sounds pretty easy. Tyra laughed. You might regret saying that. Elias reached over and took her hand. Maybe. But whatever happens next, we'll face it together. The shuttle touched down on Earth, and as they stepped out, the first rays of sunlight bathed them in warmth. A new life was waiting for them. A new beginning. And for the first time, in a long time, they were free. The end.